The deafening hum of the alien spacecraft engines gradually powered down as Thomas Oberon stared through the transparent viewport, his heart sinking at the sight of an endless stretch of red sand dunes beneath a merciless sun. After 3 weeks of being studied, measured, and tested aboard the Xerian research vessel, this was his final examination, and possibly his end. Specimen T7291 will now undergo the survival assessment, announced Chief Scientist Vernak, his 8-fingered hand adjusting the recording device hovering beside him. The tall, gray-skinned alien's large black eyes reflected no emotion as he regarded Thomas. Our calculations indicate a 99.7% probability of failure. Thomas tugged at the simple beige jumpsuit they had provided him, already feeling sweat forming on his brow from the desert heat seeping through the ship's hull. I have a name, you know. It's Thomas, and I'd appreciate if you'd stop calling me a specimen. Vernak blinked his secondary eyelids, the Xerian equivalent of a dismissive gesture. Terminology is irrelevant to the experiment. What matters is that your species claims exceptional adaptability, which our research has yet to validate. He tapped at a translucent control panel. The parameters are simple. Survive for 7 planetary rotations in this environment without technological assistance. 7 days in the desert with nothing? Thomas protested, his voice rising. That's not a test, that's an execution. Senior researcher Calzin stepped forward, her more slender frame and lighter skin tone distinguishing her from Vernak. The human exaggerates as usual. We will provide basic coverings and a cutting implement, consistent with primitive technology, sufficient for your claimed adaptive capabilities. Thomas glared at the aliens who had abducted him 3 weeks ago while he was camping in the Rockies. The Xerians were conducting what they called a comprehensive assessment of potentially intelligent species, and humans were merely entry 7291 in their catalog. If I survive this, you'll return me to Earth? Thomas asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it again. As agreed, Vernak stated flatly. Should you demonstrate sufficient adaptation to validate your species classification, you will be returned to your origin point with memory modification. Thomas didn't entirely trust their promise to simply drop him back at his campsite with only vague memories of the experience, but it was better than the alternative being classified as non-viable and relegated to a specimen jar in some alien archive. The lower hatch opened with a pneumatic hiss, releasing a blast of hot air into the ship. 2 research assistants approached Thomas with a small bundle, a knife with a bone handle, a simple cloth wrap, and a small empty canteen. These provisions represent technology consistent with your species' early development period, Calzin explained. The assessment begins upon your exit and continues for 7 complete day-night cycles. Thomas took the items, mind racing to recall everything he knew about desert survival. And if I make it? What then? Vernak's head tilted slightly. No human subject has survived similar trials beyond 2.4 days. Our simulation models predict your biological systems will cease functioning due to dehydration within 60 hours. You've done this before? Thomas felt a chill despite the heat. Different environments, different parameters. Calzin's tone was clinical. The desert assessment has been attempted 3 times with human specimens. None survived. Thomas clenched his jaw. Well, I'll be your first. Unlikely, Vernak replied without malice, but the scientific process requires we allow for statistical anomalies. Before Thomas could respond, a gentle but firm force field pushed him toward the exit. He stumbled down the ramp onto the red sand, immediately feeling the scorching heat through the thin soles of his provided footwear. Assessment commencing, Vernak announced to his recording device. Specimen release completed at local solar apex, monitoring drones deployed. Thomas spotted 3 small metallic spheres hovering around him, observation devices, he guessed. The ramp retracted and the ship's hatch sealed with finality. He watched as the massive craft rose silently into the sky before disappearing behind a shimmering distortion cloaking technology, he assumed. Alone in the vast desert, Thomas took stock of his situation. The sun beat down mercilessly from directly overhead. No visible water source, no vegetation, just endless red dunes in all directions. His scientific mind calculated his odds were indeed as poor as the aliens predicted. "Okay," he muttered to himself, feeling the weight of the hovering drone's observation. "First thing, shelter." For the next 2 hours, Thomas trudged across the dunes, searching for any geographic feature that might offer protection from the sun. The loose sand made walking difficult, each step requiring twice the effort. He wrapped the cloth around his head and face to protect from the sun and keep sand from his eyes. By mid-afternoon, Thomas found what he needed: a small rocky outcropping rising from the desert floor. It wasn't much, but the sandstone formation offered shade on its eastern side and, more importantly, suggested the possibility of underground features. Thomas examined the rock formation carefully. The sandstone had eroded in layers, creating a small overhang. He crawled under it, grateful for the relief from the direct sun. His lips were already cracking, and his throat felt like sandpaper. One of the drones hovered closer, its lens focusing on him. "Taking notes?" Thomas asked bitterly. "Here's one for your report. Humans don't give up easily." As evening approached, the temperature dropped dramatically. Thomas huddled against the rock face, conserving body heat. His mind raced through everything he had learned about desert survival from books, training courses, and survival shows. The first night was brutal. Without water, his tongue swelled slightly, and his head pounded with the beginning of dehydration. He dozed fitfully, curling up to preserve warmth against the desert's freezing night. At dawn, Thomas knew he needed to act quickly before the day's heat sapped his remaining strength. He began to explore the base of the rocky outcropping, searching for signs that might indicate water. The stone formation had to have been created by some geological process. Perhaps the same process had created underground water reserves. He noticed a slight depression in the sand near the base of the rocks, where morning dew had moistened the ground slightly more than the surrounding area. It wasn't much, but it was a sign. "Water flows downhill," he muttered to himself, "even underground." Using the knife, Thomas began to dig. The sand gave way easily at first, but after 2 feet, he hit harder packed soil. His hands blistered as he continued to dig, occasionally using the knife to break through tougher sections. 3 feet down, the soil changed color, becoming darker. Thomas dug faster, ignoring his bleeding hands and the sweat pouring down his face. 4 feet down, the soil felt damp, not wet, but definitely containing moisture. "Come on," he grunted, digging faster. 5 feet down, his knife struck something solid. At first, he feared he'd hit bedrock, but careful probing revealed it was a layer of clay. Clay often formed impermeable layers that trapped water underneath. Thomas stabbed through the clay with his knife, twisting to create a hole. Nothing happened at first, then a slow seep of muddy water began to fill the bottom of his crude well. He laughed with relief, the sound cracking in his parched throat. The drone circled more actively, clearly recording this unexpected development. "Water table," Thomas explained to his alien observers, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Desert doesn't mean no water, it means hidden water." He waited impatiently for the muddy liquid to settle, then carefully scooped some into his canteen. It was silty and would need filtering, but it was water. Using a corner of his cloth, he made a crude filter and slowly transferred the cleaner water to the canteen. The first sips were heavenly, even with the earthy taste. Thomas forced himself to drink slowly, knowing that gulping water could make him sick after dehydration. As the day progressed, Thomas improved his well, widening it and reinforcing the sides with rocks from the outcropping. By evening, he had a steady, if small, supply of water. The drones continued their observation, occasionally emitting soft beeps that Thomas interpreted as communication with the cloaked ship. He wondered what the aliens made of his success so far. On the third day, Thomas expanded his survival strategy. With water secured, he began exploring further from his shelter. The desert wasn't as barren as it first appeared. He found small, tough plants growing in the shadows of rocks, not enough for a meal, but their roots could supplement his diet and slow starvation. Using the knife, he carefully harvested the fibrous plant matter, chewing it slowly to extract what nutrients and moisture he could. It tasted bitter and resinous, but his body welcomed anything it could get. By the fourth day, Thomas had established a routine maintaining his well in the early morning, seeking plant materials during the cooler dawn and dusk hours, and resting during the hottest part of the day. His body was growing weaker from calorie deficit, but with water, he could survive much longer than the aliens had predicted. That evening, something changed. One of the drones descended closer than usual, hovering just feet from where Thomas sat outside his shelter. "Enjoying the show?" Thomas asked it dryly. To his surprise, the drone projected a small holographic image of Vernick and Calzin. "Your adaptation is unexpected," Vernick stated, his large eyes blinking rapidly. "The well-digging behavior was not predicted by our models." Thomas laughed weakly. "Maybe your models need updating." Calzin leaned forward in the projection. The other specimens attempted to walk to find water sources or waited for rescue. None considered subterranean water extraction. "That's because you're not testing random humans," Thomas explained, taking a careful sip from his canteen. "I'm a geologist with desert expedition experience. I know how water behaves in arid environments." The aliens exchanged glances. "This specialization was not in your neural scans," Vernick said accusingly. "Neural scans don't show everything," Thomas replied. "Experience isn't just stored in brain patterns, it's in muscle memory, intuitive thinking, problem-solving approaches." After a moment of silence, Calzin spoke. "The assessment parameters remain unchanged. 3 more day-night cycles must be completed." The projection disappeared, and the drone resumed its hovering position above Thomas. He smiled grimly. "That's fine. I'll be here." The 5th day brought a new challenge. A massive sandstorm swept across the desert without warning. Thomas barely made it to his shelter before the wall of sand hit. He curled into the deepest part of the rock overhang, covering himself entirely with the cloth. For hours the storm raged, sand filling his crude well and threatening to bury him alive. The drones disappeared, unable to function in the storm, or recalled to the ship. Thomas couldn't tell. When the storm finally passed, Thomas emerged to find his survival work destroyed. The well was completely filled with sand, and many of the plants he'd found were buried. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm him. 3 more days seemed impossible now. His hands were raw, his body weakened by minimal nutrition, and he'd have to start over. One of the drones reappeared, hovering expectantly. "Still here," Thomas called to it hoarsely. "Going to take more than sand to stop me." With renewed determination, Thomas began digging again. The second well went faster. He knew exactly where to dig and how deep to go. By nightfall, he had water again, though less than before. The 6th day passed in a haze of hunger and exhaustion. Thomas's body was shutting down non-essential functions to conserve energy. He moved slowly, deliberately, focusing solely on maintaining his water supply and finding any edible plant matter. That evening, the holographic projection returned. "Your biological readings indicate severe stress," Calzin observed. "Heart rate variability and metabolic markers suggest imminent system failure." "Thanks for the diagnosis," Thomas replied weakly. "I'll take it under advisement." Vernick's expression was unreadable. The previous record for human survival in these conditions was 57 hours. "You have exceeded 138 hours." Going for the high score, Thomas quipped, then coughed painfully. Why continue? Calzin asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. The physical distress must be severe. Thomas considered the question seriously. Because giving up isn't what humans do. We adapt, we survive, and sometimes we surprise ourselves with what we're capable of. The aliens conferred quietly before Vernak spoke again. The assessment will proceed as established. One more day-night cycle remains. The final day was the hardest. Thomas's vision blurred occasionally, and his movements were clumsy from weakness. He rationed his water carefully, knowing a rescue was coming if he could just hold on. As the seventh sunset painted the desert red, Thomas sat against his rock shelter, watching the horizon. He had made it. Against all predictions, against the alien certainty of his failure, he had survived. The low hum of engines announced the ship's return. The massive craft decloaked directly above him, its shadow providing blessed relief from the evening sun. The landing ramp extended, and several Xerians emerged, including Vernak and Calzin. Assessment complete, Vernak announced to his recording device. Subject has survived the designated period. Thomas tried to stand but found his legs wouldn't cooperate. 2 research assistants approached and helped him to his feet. His body felt like it was made of lead. Congratulations, Calzin said, studying him with those large alien eyes. You have defied our predictive models. Happy to disappoint, Thomas replied weakly. Once inside the ship, the Xerians placed Thomas on a medical platform that immediately began scanning and treating his dehydration, malnutrition, and sun exposure. Your well-digging technique, Vernak said, standing nearby. This is common knowledge among humans. Thomas felt strength returning as fluids and nutrients flooded his system. Not common, but not rare either. Desert peoples have been finding underground water for thousands of years. It's basic survival knowledge for anyone trained in arid environments. And yet the other specimens did not attempt it, Calzin noted, reviewing data on a floating screen. Maybe they didn't have my background, Thomas suggested. Or maybe they panicked. Fear clouds judgment. Vernak made a gesture that caused several displays to appear around them. We have revised our assessment of human adaptability. Your species demonstrates greater problem-solving capability and environmental adaptation than our models predicted. Thomas sat up slowly as the medical platform completed its work. So I passed your test. Does that mean you'll return me home as promised? Yes, Calzin confirmed. But first, there's a matter we wish to discuss. Thomas tensed. What matter? Vernak dismissed the displays with a wave. The Xerian Xenobiological Survey has cataloged over 12,000 sentient or proto-sentient species. We classify them based on adaptability, intelligence, and survival capabilities. And where do humans rank? Thomas asked. Previously, in the mid-range of potentially viable species, Calzin answered. But your performance suggests a reclassification is warranted. Vernak stepped closer. We propose an exchange of knowledge. Your desert water location technique for information about space travel beyond your solar system. Thomas blinked in surprise. You want me to teach you how to find water? Not just you, Calzin clarified. We propose establishing formal contact with your species. Your demonstration of adaptability qualifies humans for limited technological exchange under Xerian protocols. Thomas couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're saying that because I dug a well, you want to give humans space technology? Not precisely, Vernak corrected. The well digging was merely the final evidence in a cumulative assessment. Your species has demonstrated resilience, problem-solving, and adaptation across multiple tests with multiple specimens. Other humans, Thomas asked, how many have you tested? 17, Calzin replied matter-of-factly. Each subjected to different environmental challenges. Yours was the most extreme. Thomas felt a mixture of anger and amazement. You've been abducting and testing humans, and now you want to be friends. Scientific protocol requires thorough assessment before contact, Vernick stated as if it were obvious. Would you prefer we had arrived openly without understanding your capabilities? Thomas had to admit they had a point. Earth's history was full of disastrous first contacts between cultures of unequal technology. So what happens now? He asked. You will be returned as promised, Calzin explained, with your memory intact if you choose. We will then begin diplomatic preparation for formal contact with your global authorities within 1 standard year. And if I say no, Thomas pressed, then you return with modified memories as originally agreed, and we seek another representative, Vernick said simply. The assessment results remain valid regardless. Thomas considered his options. Part of him wanted nothing more than to forget this whole ordeal. Another part recognized the historic opportunity before him. I'll do it, he decided finally, but on one condition, no more abductions or tests. You want to know about humans, you ask, clearly and directly. The aliens exchanged glances before Vernick responded. Acceptable terms. The abduction protocol is inefficient compared to diplomatic exchange in any case. Thomas extended his hand, then realized the gesture might not translate. On Earth, we shake hands to seal an agreement. After a moment's hesitation, Vernick extended his 8-fingered hand and awkwardly mimicked the human handshake. A most unusual custom, the alien observed, but effective in its symbolism. 3 days later, Thomas stood in the exact spot where he had been taken from his camping trip in the Rockies. His watch showed that only 2 hours had passed on Earth, though he had been gone for nearly a month by his own experience. Remember, Calzin said as the ship prepared to depart, 1 Earth year. We will contact you first with coordinates for the initial diplomatic meeting. Thomas nodded, still processing everything that had happened. I'll be ready. As the ship rose silently into the night sky, Thomas looked up at the stars with new perspective. Somewhere up there, alien scientists were rewriting their assessment of humanity based on his simple act of digging a well in the desert. He smiled to himself. Sometimes, the most basic survival skills make the biggest impression. In the year that followed, Thomas worked with government officials to prepare for the planned contact. Initially met with skepticism, his detailed knowledge of Xerian biology and technology eventually convinced even the most doubtful authorities. International protocols were established, diplomatic teams assembled, and contingency plans created for humanity's first official extraterrestrial contact. Exactly 1 year after his return, Thomas stood with a small group of diplomats, scientists, and military personnel in a remote area of the New Mexico desert. The coordinates had arrived exactly as promised, transmitted directly to the secure communication device the Xerians had provided him. As the massive Xerian ship decloaked and descended, Thomas couldn't help but remember his desperate days in that alien desert, digging for water while being observed by hovering drones. They're coming in, announced a military officer watching radar readings. Remember, Thomas advised the assembled team, they value adaptation and practical problem-solving above all else. Show them humanity's ingenuity, not just our technology. The ship touched down, sending up a cloud of dust. After a moment, a ramp extended, and several Xerians emerged. Thomas recognized Vernick and Calzin among them. Welcome to Earth, Thomas called out, stepping forward as the designated first contact representative. Vernick approached, performing a passable imitation of a human handshake. Greetings, Thomas Oberon. We are pleased to establish formal relations with your species. We hope this marks the beginning of a productive exchange, added Calzin. As the formal introductions proceeded, Thomas caught Vernick studying the surroundings with interest. Is something wrong? Thomas asked quietly. Not wrong, the alien replied. I am simply noting that you chose a desert location for our meeting. Significant, given our history. Thomas smiled. I thought it appropriate. After all, it was in a desert that humanity proved its worth to you. Indeed, Vernick agreed, though I must confess, our research team has been practicing your well-digging technique. Most fascinating how such a simple approach can extract hidden resources. That's humanity in a nutshell, Thomas said, finding what's hidden and making the most of it. As the diplomatic proceedings continued, Thomas watched the sunrise over the desert landscape. The same sun that had nearly killed him now illuminated humanity's first steps into a wider galactic community. All because he knew how to find water where others saw only sand. The formal contact proceeded better than anyone had dared hope. The Xerians, true to their scientific nature, approached the relationship methodically, beginning with exchanges of basic cultural and scientific information before proceeding to more advanced technologies. Within 5 years, the first human-Xerian joint research facility was established in orbit around Earth. Thomas served as the human liaison, his unique experience making him invaluable to both sides. It still amazes me, Callison commented one day as they observed Earth from the station's viewing deck, that such a significant relationship began with something as simple as digging in sand. Thomas shrugged. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most impressive. A lesson we have taken to heart, Vernick added, joining them. Our methodologies have been revised to place greater emphasis on practical problem solving rather than pure theoretical modeling. The Xerian scientific community had indeed been profoundly affected by the well incident, as it was now called in their records. It had exposed a blind spot in their approach. They had been so focused on advanced solutions that they overlooked the elegance of basic survival techniques. As promised, the Xerians shared faster-than-light travel technology, enabling humanity's first interstellar missions. In exchange, humans taught the aliens about their unique approaches to adaptation and survival across diverse environments. 10 years after that fateful desert test, Thomas found himself back on the original Xerian research vessel, this time as an honored guest rather than a specimen. We are approaching the testing site, Vernick informed him as they entered orbit around a distant planet. It has been preserved exactly as it was. The ship descended through the atmosphere, landing near the familiar rocky outcropping where Thomas had made his stand. The sight brought back vivid memories, the desperate digging, the triumph of finding water, the pain of hunger and exposure. Why did you want to come back here? Callison asked as they disembarked. Thomas walked to the spot where he had dug his well. The depression was still visible, though a decade of wind and sand had mostly filled it in. To remember where it all began, he answered, and to show you something. Using a modern tool rather than the primitive knife he'd had before, Thomas quickly dug down to where he knew the water table would be. Within minutes, water began seeping into the hole. You see, Thomas explained, the water is still here. It always was. You just need to know how to find it. Vernick studied the well thoughtfully. A metaphor for our relationship with humanity. The potential was always present, merely awaiting discovery. As they prepared to leave the planet, Thomas took one last look at the desert that had nearly claimed his life, but instead had opened the door to the stars. It was a harsh, unforgiving place, but it had taught both humans and Xerians a valuable lesson about survival, adaptation, and looking beneath the surface. Ready to return? Callison asked. Thomas nodded. Yes. There's still a universe of hidden resources waiting for us to find them. The ship lifted off, leaving behind a small marker at the site, a simple monument commemorating the place where humanity's cosmic journey truly began, with a man digging a well in an alien desert, defying the predictions of extraterrestrial scientists who had underestimated the human capacity to adapt and survive. In the decades that followed, as human-Xerian cooperation expanded to include other species and systems, The story became something of a legend among both races, a reminder that sometimes the greatest technological achievements begin with the most fundamental survival skills, and that true intelligence isn't measured by theoretical knowledge, but by the ability to adapt and overcome when faced with seemingly impossible odds. And whenever a new challenge arose that seemed insurmountable, someone would inevitably reference the well solution, shorthand for looking beyond conventional wisdom to find the simple answer hiding beneath the surface. Thomas eventually retired from his role as liaison, training a new generation of human representatives to work with the growing number of alien species making contact with Earth. But he never forgot those 7 days in the desert that changed the course of human history. On the 20th anniversary of first contact, he returned once more to the desert planet, this time accompanied by a joint human-Xerian scientific team. Where his crude well had once stood, they established a research station dedicated to survival techniques across diverse environments, a place where species from across the galaxy could learn from each other's adaptive strategies. As Thomas watched the facility's inauguration, he reflected on how far things had come from those desperate hours when he had dug in the sand with bleeding hands, fighting for each breath under the merciless sun. "Something on your mind?" asked Wernick, who had likewise moved into an advisory role over the years. "Just thinking about how uncertain the outcome seemed back then," Thomas replied. "How close we came to missing all of this." "The uncertainty was primarily yours," Wernick noted. "Our models gave you virtually no chance of survival," Thomas laughed, "and yet here we are." "Indeed," the alien agreed. "A valuable reminder that models are only as good as their underlying assumptions. We assumed no human would think to dig for water." "And I assumed I was going to die in an alien desert," Thomas added. "We were both wrong, in the best possible way." As the sun set on the desert world, casting long shadows across the sand, Thomas and Wernick stood side by side, no longer specimen and scientist, but colleagues and, in their own way, friends. Two beings from vastly different worlds, united by a simple well dug in desperation and the profound changes that had flowed from it. "To unexpected discoveries," Thomas said, raising a container of water drawn from the research station's modern well system, a far cry from his crude hole in the ground 20 years earlier. Wernick mimicked the gesture with his own container. "And to those with the wisdom to look beneath the surface." Their journey had begun with a test of survival and had evolved into something neither could have predicted: a partnership that had helped both species grow beyond their limitations and reach for the stars together. All because an alien scientist had said a human couldn't survive the desert, and the human had dug a well and proved him wrong.